This episode of Planted is brought to you by Pax Labs,
the Radio Misfits Podcast Network.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Planted with Sara Pine. I'm Sara Pine, your host, and today's guest is making his second appearance on the show, and I'm delighted to have him back. Joining me is Dr. Peter Grinspoon, physician, educator, cannabis advocate, and author of the new book, Aging Well with Cannabis. The last time Peter joined us, we talked about his personal journey, recovery, medicine, and his book, Seeing Through the Smoke. Today, we're picking up where we left off to discuss aging, quality of life, what cannabis can and can't do as we get older, and fascinating new research on safer ways to consume cannabis. Peter, welcome back to Planet. I'm so excited to have you here. Yeah, absolutely. So last time you were on Planted, we spent a lot of time talking about cannabis, medicine stigma, and your personal journey, along with that great book that I just love. This book feels different. It's really a book about quality of life. What pulled you towards this conversation?
Well, the demographic, I see this a lot in my clinic. I've been taking care of medical cannabis patients for 25 years. And I see this in clinic, that demographic that is embracing medical cannabis most rapidly in our population is seniors, people over 65. They're really finding the cannabis helps them with, the chronic pain that accompanies getting older. Your joints, your hips, your backs, your knees sort of wear out. Your insomnia, you don't sleep as well when you're older. Anxiety, all kinds of other issues, colitis, nerve pain. It's just almost endless. And they're embracing cannabis, but there's very little good information about how they could do this safely. Like, what does it actually work for? What doesn't it work for? People will claim cannabis does everything and anything, and it obviously works for some things and doesn't work for other things, like all medications. How can you get started? How can you use it safely? What are the different delivery devices? What is it like when you go into a dispensary? I mean, imagine you're my patient and you've never used marijuana before, and you come in and you want to try it for chronic pain. You have to start someone very slowly at that age and very carefully. Like, the last thing you want them to do is take too much and have a really awful experience.
Yeah.
So I wrote the book Aging Well with Cannabis for family members, but for seniors, to learn how to use cannabis safely and effectively. And so far, so good.
As you were writing it, what surprised you most about aging, your patients, or maybe even something that you figured out about yourself during the process?
Well, a lot of things. It's a good question. It's really amazing, the stigma that still persists around medical cannabis, especially among older patients. They have been exposed to more of like the drug war nonsense. And, a larger percentage of their life has been during the drug war, as opposed to younger people who've sort of seen us like we're still fighting the drug war, but at least the information is like more two-sided now. And just seeing the struggle between the stigma, but also the real desire for relief from suffering, and really seeing this sort of, people confronting this. And at the end of the day, people don't want to suffer. I mean, I think medicine is just as much about alleviating suffering as it is about diagnosing and treating diseases. And it's been really amazing to see people that say, I would never use marijuana, come back a couple years later and like, my hips are really hurting. I don't want to be on opiates for a million reasons. They get addicted, you could fall, you get constipated. I don't want to be on ibuprofen. It's wrecking my kidney. I want to try some medical cannabis. So it's really just been interesting to see the stigma and the way in which people being exposed to other people who are having good experiences can kind of eat away at the stigma. And we're definitely heading in the right direction.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's definitely more peer-to-peer conversations. Like, here in California, I've gone up to Rossmore, where they have a cannabis club of over 200 people. And I've spoken there a couple of times. And there's another neighborhood that's full of seniors that also has a club that I've spoken at, just a little further up in Antioch. And they're all really excited to learn. And they have varying amounts of experience. Like, some people experimented when they were younger. Some people have always enjoyed it kind of because they did grow up during the war on drugs. They kind of kept it on the DL. And then other people are hearing these conversations that their peers are having, and they're curious, but they don't have that safe container for experimentation. They get nervous about getting high. And I think one of the biggest things that is a differentiator in getting people to actually try is hearing from doctors like you, because I know like when I was working in the dispensary and Sanjay Gupta's documentary, the first one came out, that's when we saw an influx of a lot of seniors. Like I had a woman in her 90s come in and she was like, well, if Dr. Gupta says it's okay, and I have, gabapentin hasn't been working well for me, I want to see how this goes. And it seems like if you start slowly with a non-euphoric solution, then people kind of aren't as afraid of like dipping a toe into maybe trying a little THC as an analgesic or something like that. And your work really helps normalize it because you're a doctor. You're talking about it. You have all this experience. And of course, as we know, like doctors are just a great source of information. And also just how would you say it? You personify trust.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I wish doctors are coming around and they're increasingly in favor of medical marijuana. It's sort of interesting. What a particular doctor, in my experience, thinks about medical marijuana has to do with their vantage point.
Yeah.
On the one end of the spectrum is like the oncologist. Like, find me an oncologist that is not in favor of medical marijuana. They see it helping with their patients with the chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting, the pain, the anxiety, the insomnia, and they are all in favor of it. On the other end of the spectrum is like the adolescent and young adult psychiatrists who see the rare but really concerning cases where cannabis could be contributing or certainly not helping a situation where young kids having a psychotic episode. And they tend to think cannabis does this and is just a bad thing. Most doctors are sort of in between. I would say, like, if I had to guess, again, I deal with a lot of doctors and I've been doing this for a long time. I would say like 2/3 to 3/4 of doctors now feel that cannabis is a legitimate medicine. They're coming around, they're listening to their patients. The good ones are. They're curious. Unfortunately, doctors right now are not taught much that is helpful about cannabis. So even though they might not be against it, they are often caught flat-footed in conversations when their patients bring it up. And so I really have been working hard on, and the part of why I wrote Aging Well with Cannabis is not just for patients, it's for doctors as well. I really believe that it's critical that we educate doctors and nurses about cannabis, because as it is now, few people get their practical information about cannabis from their doctors or their nurses, and they end up getting them from the bud tenders. Now, the bud tenders are like the nicest and most enthusiastic people you'll ever meet, but they're not medically trained. I mean, They don't know about medication interactions and, additive effects of different medications. And like cannabis is a medicine like every other medication. It has its harms, its benefits. People can use it in a safer or less safe manner. And I really think it would help if we could educate doctors so that they could be the ones, kind of sensibly advising patients. Bud tenders certainly could join the conversation, but they shouldn't be making recommendations. So I think we're getting there. More and more doctors are on board, but it's just a question of getting them up to speed on a lot of practical education. Like they wouldn't know how to tell people how to get started, which is why I go over that in detail in Aging Well with Cannabis.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I've done trainings with oncology and palliative care professionals, both like the students, the pharmacology students at UCSF, doctors, nurses. They say that they hear a lot from their patients and they learn from that, but otherwise they don't feel like they have a lot of information. And as far as bud tenders go, you're right on it. There's an opportunity for bud tenders to be navigators, to give useful information for people to bring back to their doctors, but they're never healthcare providers. And with the way there's a lack of training in dispensaries these days, which is also why there's high turnover in dispensaries, because they're not creating professional development, it's almost impossible for them to even be in the navigator arena, even though it's definitely a distinct possibility. I know, like with my staff, they had a lot of training and they were told, you're not medical providers, but the person's doctor may not understand anything about cannabis, but they understand what a cytochrome P450 interaction is. And if you tell them to tell their doctor that so that they can reflect on it and decide what recommendation they want to make, you're helping encourage the conversation. And it's so incredibly, incredibly important. And even like when I was going through chemo 15 years ago, my doctor was okay with me using cannabis. The head of his practice at that time was anti-cannabis. And so I had to actually go through my gastroenterologist to get my recommendation. But since then, that practice has been very supportive of their patients using cannabis. So it's like, it's evolved, it's changed. And I think, your books and the conversations that you're having is part of that evolution, because when doctors see their peers supporting this, and, you're teaching at Harvard and doing things like that. I mean, there's weight to those conversations, and it's incredibly important and essential that you put out this information.
Well, thanks. I mean, I just believe knowledge is power. And if seniors are going to be using cannabis, which I think overall is more of a good thing than a bad thing, because they could use it instead of other pharmaceuticals, which can be more toxic. We just talked about for pain. Think about for sleep. Cannabis is obviously safer than something like Ambien, or you could argue trazodone or, Valium, benzodiazepine. And so I think it's a good thing that seniors are considering cannabis one option in how to treat their suffering. But they need to do it safely. If it's not done safely, it's just a disaster. Yeah. If you take too much cannabis, like many of us have accidentally taken that brownie that was too strong, you have an awful experience. And if you're older, it could trigger an arrhythmia or a cardiac problem or an anxiety attack, or it can end you in the emergency department. So it has to be done safely. It has to be done with informed education. It has to be done slowly, carefully. And again, I think we could just make the whole thing safer. Kids get sick of seeing their parents suffer, and they're like, hey, why don't you try this 20 milligram gummy? And that's way too strong for someone who hasn't ever tried cannabis. Nothing wrong with taking a 20 milligram gummy if that's what you take. But if you're 80 and you've never tried cannabis, you start at 2.5. You don't start at 20. So I just think it's all about empowering people with knowledge and with education so that they could do it safely and effectively. And also, part of what you teach people is that cannabis is a medication like every other medication, and it has harms. We talk about the harms all the time. I think it's just as important to talk about harms as it is to talk about benefits. And it doesn't work for everybody. No medication works for everybody. So people also need to have reasonable expectations. It's not a cure-all with no side effects and no harms. But generally speaking, it's a relatively non-toxic and incredibly helpful medication for probably millions at this point of senior people.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, going back to, a high dosage edible, I mean, that can impact your balance. And how many stories have we heard of loved ones having a bad fall, ending up in rehab, and then the decline afterwards? So it's like,
it's awful, but that's exactly my point. It doesn't have to affect the opiates affect your balance. The Ambien affects your balance. The trazodone affects your balance. The benzodiazepine, a lot of these medications affect your balance. But if you start with mostly CBD, that's not going to affect your balance. And then if you add in a little bit of THC and work your way up slowly, I'm convinced you can get to a point where with any medication, we use the lowest effective dose, right? This is not recreational, people trying to get high. A lot of times the doses for medical are pretty low, and it can be done really, really safely in most people. But again, they just have to take their time, work their way up really slowly, get used to it. And, people are so excited to get symptom relief that they can overdo it. And then they get into trouble. They end up in the emergency room for taking too much. So we really, really like to start low and go slow, especially in seniors. When you're older, you're more susceptible to the effects of any psychoactive drug. Your liver doesn't work as well. Your kidney doesn't work as well. You tend to be on a lot of other medications that could interact. So we just want to be, take really, really good care of our seniors. And if we do so, we usually, almost always, have very positive outcomes.
Still smoking joints? Okay, we need to talk. If you love cannabis but you're still lighting it, let's look at what's actually happening. When you burn flower, you're creating smoke, and that smoke contains harmful compounds like tar, soot, benzene, and formaldehyde. In fact, almost 200 different compounds have been detected in joint smoke. So how do we know this? PAX decided to study it. In controlled lab testing, they compared joint smoke to vapor from their devices, using the same flower under the same conditions, and measured 16 key harmful compounds. The result is pretty striking. Vaporization reduced those compounds by more than 95%, because when you heat cannabis instead of burning it, you change what you inhale. You still get cannabinoids and flavor, just without all the extra stuff that comes from smoke. This isn't about judgment. It's about information. If you want to learn more, go to pax.com/science. Pax is setting higher standards so you can smoke less smoke. And for Planted listeners, get 20% off at pax.com with code PLANTED20. Yeah, it's true. And when I was doing trainings with the pharmacology students, they would throw patient profiles at me and be like, okay, so blah, 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 blah. What's the ratio and the dosage that you'd give? And then I look at them, I'm like, okay, so when you start a patient on levothyroxine, do you know exactly what you're going to give them? Or do you start low and then you do the blood tests and you check and see how things go?
You do the blood test.
Yeah. And they're like, oh, I'm like, it's not, I think that's a thing that for some medical professionals might be confusing, is that it's not different. Like you were saying, it's not different than any other pharmaceutical with the way that you handle it. I mean, we're walking chemistry experiments.
With thyroid's an interesting example. Because say you're low thyroid, I will get at a low modest dose, like 75, and you might need 100, you might need 88, and you might need 50.
Right.
So I'll make an educated guess. With cannabis, I'll make an educated guess, but I'll make an educated guess at the lowest possible level. So sometimes with medications, you make a guess in the middle because it's not like you're going to freak out and end up in the emergency room, and then you adjust it down.
Right.
So in all cases, you make an educated guess. But with cannabis, we're really, really conservative. I'm a lot more conservative with cannabis than I am with thyroid, because if you give a little bit too much thyroid, you just adjust it down. It's not the end of the world.
Totally. I know my mother-in-law, she's 88, and she was dealing with gabapentin, which was making her crabby because of her neuropathy in her feet. And I brought her some infused Epsom salts, and I was like, Mom, as long as you don't take a full bath, you're not going to get high. Just do a foot bath. And she has so much relief that she didn't have to use her walker anymore. She just uses her cane when she absolutely needs it. And she brought the bag to her doctor, and she's like, and Mom is like, at 88, she pulls no punches. She's like, gabapentin made me bitchy. This stuff works. Why aren't you talking to your patients about this? But to her doctor's credit, she took a picture of it, and she was like, that's interesting.
Oh, that's great. I mean, gabapentin is a great example. First of all, I personally think gabapentin is the most overfluffed medication. I don't think it's that effective. I've had sciatica. I've tried gabapentin. All it really did is make me feel like a pithed frog. It made me completely brain dead, and it didn't really help with my pain. It's one of the top 10 selling medications, I believe, in the country. And they advertise. And it really makes people foggy and sleepy and not feel good. And, you look at the algorithms for pain. We try this, then we try Tylenol, then a non-steroidal, and then blah, 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 and opiate, gabapentin. And now the doctors are begrudgingly adding cannabis, 6th or 7th on the list. But I think it should be much higher up on the list. I just don't get why medications like gabapentin are tried before a small dose of cannabinoids are, because they have fewer side effects, you feel better, and they're more effective. So it's just really interesting. It's going to take a while to change. Part of it, of course, is the big pharma influence, which is not going to go away. But at the same time, a lot of this just force of habit or lingering sort of superstitions from the war on drugs is going to take a while to change doctor behavior. But I love the example of gabapentin, because it's just I would rather use cannabis than gabapentin on many of my patients. I just think it has fewer side effects, and I've had more success with it.
Do you think that part of it too is that because a lot of physicians are very protocol based, that cannabis isn't baked into the protocols yet, and that may be part of the problem as well?
Yes. Absolutely. Well, it's complicated. First of all, it's still legal on the federal level. So even though it's legal in Massachusetts, if I prescribe it to you, I could still get in trouble. That's not a real problem, because 90% of Americans support legal access to medical marijuana. There's nothing else that 90% of Americans support. They don't even agree that the sky is blue. So I just don't think there's going to be a lot of prosecution. But it's still weird for doctors to prescribe something that's federally illegal. They've been sort of ingrained not to do that. And then it's confusing to doctors that it's legal in some states and it's illegal in other states. I mean, it's confusing to the rest of us, but it's confusing to doctors, right? I mean, I'm allowed to prescribe drugs. All the drugs I'm allowed to prescribe by definition are legal because I'm allowed to prescribe them. Other drugs I can't prescribe them, like LSD, unfortunately, or psilocybin or ecstasy, because they're still in Schedule 1. Hopefully those will all change because those are very therapeutic. But it's just confusing to doctors that in some states, patients can just go to the dispensary and buy cannabis. In other states, you need a medical card. And in other states like Idaho, there's no cannabis whatsoever. You still get arrested. So that makes it very difficult for doctors, along with what I mentioned before, the really inconsistent and like incomplete education that doctors get. And there's also like, I mean, I hate to say it, but there's just a lot of vested interests. Like we mentioned big pharma a little while ago. I think a lot of the pain doctors really love giving these injections where they get paid a lot of money for giving injections. And then so a lot of the pain societies are like, cannabis doesn't work at all for pain. And it's like, come on, even way back in 2017, the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine said there was conclusive evidence that cannabis works for pain. I mean, anybody who's used cannabis knows that it works for pain. You have muscle aches, you take a gummy, you fall asleep. That's what it works for. But, you know, some of these pain societies are like, oh, there's no evidence that it works. And I can't help, there's so much evidence. I can't help but feel that there's like competing commercial interests. I mean, there was that quote, which I'm going to butcher, by like Sinclair Lewis, where it's like, it's difficult to get a man to understand something if his income depends on him understanding the opposite. And I think we go through some of that with cannabis. So we have a lot of obstacles. You're right. It's algorithm driven. It's protocol driven, but the cannabis is not number 1, 2, or 3 in the protocol. And it's going to take a lot of time to get there.
Yeah, 100%. Well, and there was some really interesting research that just came out of Europe about the analgesic effects of THC, which proves that, you know, it can be more effective than opiates. And as we both know, it's definitely safer. So I'm wondering, you know, how that's going to affect this, or if there's still going to be more focus on the pocketbook than, you know, the data.
Well, we also have a lot of doctors in this country. I hate to name names, but the addiction psychiatrists that just come out with study after study after study saying cannabis doesn't work. And that gets into all the newspapers. And, you know, during the war on drugs for the last 70 years, the only research that got funded by the US government, which funded 80 to 90% of the research on drugs worldwide, was studies into the harms of cannabis. To get any research, to get any money to research cannabis, you had to show a drop in something. You had to drop IQ, sperm count, IQ, something bad had to happen for you to get funded. So there are all these studies that aren't really science, because they weren't saying, is this helpful or harmful? They were saying, let's prove this is harmful. And then these psychiatrists just do these meta-analyses of these studies that were all done during the war on drugs. And it's like kind of garbage in, garbage out. Yeah. So we definitely, there's more and more and more evidence every day that cannabis is helping people, for example, with pain. But we also have this whole counter narrative going on, which is what makes it so confusing for patients.
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of it's clickbait. Even when especially like the stuff that we were seeing about heart attacks and cannabis this year, and it's like, I remember getting a bunch of emails and calls from people saying, "Is this true? Is this true?" I'm like, okay, so this is an exercise in critical thought. You've read the article. Now, actually go in and read the research. Like, look at that paper, and if it says may or possible, they haven't proven anything yet. And they're grabbing onto that and they're saying, this is doing that. That's clickbait. That's called money for clicks. So we see that in so many things.
Right. It's complicated because the headlines are very,
definitive,
attention grabbing.
Yeah.
And, that's publication bias. Mm-hmm. So like if there's a negative study, cannabis doesn't do X, whether it's a benefit or a harm, it just doesn't get reported. Only the extreme benefits and the extreme harms get reported. So that's the real bias right there, is publication bias. And like, if cannabis doesn't have a harm, it's just as important as if cannabis does have a harm.
Yeah.
And if cannabis doesn't have a benefit, that's just as important as if cannabis gets a benefit. But the study was negative is not an interesting headline. So on both sides of the cannabis issue, we are only getting one side of the picture. But then there's the newspaper headline. Then there's what the researchers conclude. And sometimes the journalists don't really interpret correctly, commonly, what the researchers are absolutely saying. So you actually have to read the summary of the study. But then a lot of the times the researchers fluff up their findings or feel a lot of pressure to do one thing or another. And if it might show, cannabis increases a little bit the chance of heart attacks, but decreases the chance of diabetes. The authors will feel pressure to be like anti-cannabis, and they'll say it causes more heart attacks. But I'm like, but wait, I read the study. It also says that it lowers the risk of diabetes. It does both. So it's really impractical. But if you really want to get to the bottom of things, you sort of have to read the whole study. And I know that's really impractical, but it's very difficult the way the researchers try to slant things, and then the way the news, as you said, goes through the clickbait. It makes it very difficult for people to actually know what's going on. I do want to say for cardiac, the data is really mixed about whether cannabis contributes to heart attacks or coronary syndromes. Some studies say no, some studies say yes. Some studies say yes, but it's sicker people that use medical marijuana. So of course they're going to have more heart attacks or other healthcare problems. So it's really confusing. But what I think is that it's not the cannabis itself. It's not the CBD. It's not the THC. It's the combustion products, the smoking. Because, cannabis smoke, it does have carbon monoxide. It does have tar, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. It has a lot of the same crap the cigarette smoke has. Now, if you take one puff a week at a party, obviously that's not going to affect your heart. But if you're like one of these people that puffs on your vape pen every 5 minutes or has it constantly as a joint burning, I mean, that could quite possibly be bad for your heart. So the jury's out, but it's not complete nonsense about the heart. It's something I am somewhat concerned of. I think we could really, really avoid a lot of the problems if we moved away from smoking it towards edibles and tinctures. Now, people get immediate relief from smoking it. So medical patients love smoking it. And most medical patients right now actually smoke it. And we educate people not to, and it's an uphill battle because people really enjoy it and they get good symptom relief. But I think you wouldn't have an issue, just my intuition, with heart, things like that, if you didn't have the combustion products.
Yeah, well, and then when you look at people who are smoking joints, then you're getting the carcinogens from the paper as well, which, hey, every once in a while enjoying a joint is one thing, but if you're using that as your main way of medicating, that could be problematic, not only from that, but the fact that the window of relief is much smaller than other modes of use as well.
Right. And often if you can get someone away from smoking, because you could finally convince them that it's not good for their lungs, and then they start taking a tincture and edible, they actually, just as you said, they enjoy the fact that they get longer acting relief. If you smoke, you just get relief for a couple hours. But if you take it edible, for example, once you find the right dose, you can get relief for 6 to 8 hours. And if you have like chronic pain, it's much better to have a stable dose of medication in your body as opposed to like having it fluctuate up and down and the pain goes up and down. It's really miserable. So I think a lot of people do a lot better once they make that switch. But again, people enjoy smoking it. They're in the habit of smoking it. And it can be very difficult to convince people not to.
Yeah, I know, like during the pandemic, I had my mother-in-law, she was never interested in cannabis, but I ended up getting her some high CBD flower and a dry herb vape. And she said, that she found that it was helping her because she has a couple of things going on. She gets vertigo that's put her in the hospital. And then also during the pandemic, she ended up being put on oxygen because she has COPD, and she's also been dealing with leukemia for over 20 years, which has been manageable. And sorry, Mom, I'm talking about you. But she did say, like, I gave her one that had a little bit more THC, but still a lot of CBD, and then one that was mostly CBD and a very small amount of THC. So like a 10-to-1 CBD to THC and a 2-to-1 THC to CBD. And she was saying that taking a hit of the high CBD right as she was starting to feel vertigo come on, instead of having to deal with it for days, she found that she was actually back in her body within hours. And then another day she called me and she was like, hey, Sarah. She's like, I was having the blues today because I wasn't able to see my friends at the senior center. We're all home. I'm on my oxygen. She's like, and I took a tiny puff and it just put me in a better mood. It didn't get me high, but I was able to sit out on my lanai with a book and everything just felt better. I don't feel like I need to use this all the time, but it's nice to have something that reacts quickly that I have in my back pocket if I need it. And I think that that's like, the conversation that we could have around that is that it may not be something for all the time there's a time and a place. All the modes of use are useful in their own ways, but like, let's have some real talks about it. And I love, when you and I talk, we always talk about, whereas, like we were saying, a lot of people, especially like researchers, will be very negative about cannabis. A lot of people in our community and in the cannabis industry want to see it as a panacea, but the reality is there are pros and cons, just like with everything. And I just really think that those conversations are so incredibly important, which is also why I was really excited about you putting out the book. But, everybody seems to be talking about longevity these days, but living longer and living well aren't necessarily the same thing. When you talk about aging well, what do you mean? This episode is brought to you by Fat Nugs Magazine, a global perspective of cannabis and stoner culture as a bridge to the rest of the world. Right now, you can join Fat Nugs Magazine, Beard Bros Farms, Freedom Grow, and Jailed for Weed in the upcoming Prisoners Edition and help spotlight current and past cannabis prisoners and their stories, because no one should be in jail for a plant. Find Fat Nugs Magazine's beautiful print copies at your local dispensary, fatnugsmag.com, and on socials. Cannabis culture welcomes us all.
Not quantity. Mm-hmm. Like, I personally would rather live to 85, no walker, perfect memory, hiking in the mountains, whatever, and then die in my sleep, than, be kept alive till 97, in the hospital most of the time, on a million medications, on oxygen, in a wheelchair. I mean, I'm all about quality, not quantity. And I just think that we torture people. I'm a huge advocate. This is a whole nother show, but in physician-assisted suicide, if people want it. I don't get if people are in extreme agonizing pain. They've got cancer all over. Their life is going to be clearly downhill. Why they can't just say goodbye to everybody and not suffer? I don't get that at all. But I think aging well is about several things. At the end of the day, it's about community. It's about being with other people, connecting with other people. There's an epidemic of loneliness. People are dying of loneliness. It's just awful. During the pandemic, some of the older patients were so lonely, they'd make appointments to see me as their primary care doctor just to have someone to talk to. I mean, it was so sad. And then after about an hour, of course, I'm only given like 20, 30 minutes to see a patient. After like an hour, I'd be like, look, I'm really sorry. They're going to crucify me if I don't see the next patient. And they'd look so sad. And so I think aging well is about community and about connecting with people. We're social creatures, but you can't really do that very well if you're in extreme pain. You can't really do that well if you're not sleeping. So that, or if you're really, really anxious. So cannabis can help alleviate the symptoms, and it can also facilitate people connecting with each other. People, you talked about these senior groups, cannabis groups, but even on a more granular level, someone's in a lot of pain, they use a little bit of cannabis. Cannabis dulls the pain somewhat, but it also affects the part of your brain which interprets pain as a negative sensation. So they're like, I can still feel the pain, but it doesn't bother me that much. Maybe I'll go down and participate in an activity. Then they're with their friends. They're participating in an activity, say at their senior living center. And then when they're doing something fun, playing cards or whatever, or playing these vicious Scrabble games that my 95-year-old mother gets in, they're not thinking about their pain, and they get into this positive feedback cycle. So I think aging well is about health and about community and connection. And I think the cannabis can really facilitate that on a lot of different levels. And I think it's not a coincidence that the demographic of patients that's embracing medical cannabis most quickly is our seniors, because they're learning that it can really help them. I mean, why have people suffer? I never understood that. I'm like, if we have something that can alleviate their suffering, why not in a safe and effective manner give it to them?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's Jeff and I will joke about that. We're getting to that point in our lives where it's like you have like a pain or something and you tell your doctor, they're like, well, what are you doing? And then you tell me like, well, don't do that. You're like, oh, that's it. I just don't get to do that anymore. And that kind of, a little less of that. Yeah. And that builds as we get older. And so you don't always get to do the things that brought you joy when you were younger, and finding those things, and also finding community, I think is incredibly important, especially because I think as we get older, and we start losing friends and everything. And there's also that invisibility that we get as we get older too, which can be really, really challenging. One thing I've observed over and over during my years working with patients is that people rarely come in, asking for cannabis. When I was in the dispensary, they would come in, and much like what you were mentioning earlier, they would come in for sleep, pain relief, mobility, appetite, relief from anxiety, especially like in the past 10 years. A lot of people have had there's just been a lot of stuff going on in our world. Not that there hasn't always been, but it's like, especially when big things happen, that would seem to be, yeah, 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 we'll just put it out there. It is. It totally is. But, or just even simply just enjoying their lives again. Do you think we spend too much time talking about cannabis, not enough time talking about the outcomes?
Well, yes. At the end of the day, we're trying to improve people's quality of life.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the main outcome that matters. I mean, that you improve their quality of life if their pain scores go down, their sleep gets better, their anxiety goes down. So sure, that's one of the metrics that almost always goes up in many of these studies about cannabis is the health-related quality of life. And all these other things we're talking about don't really work if you don't have a reasonably good health-related quality of life. I mean, again,
Right.
If you're not sleeping, you're in extreme pain, you're having panic, you're definitely not going to be having a good health-related quality of life. So yeah, we do need to talk about outcomes, but like the outcomes are so intertwined. I mean, your outcome has to be controlling your chronic pain. It's a question of how to do that with the least amount of side effects. And again, for a lot of people, it's cannabis. Not for everybody. Some people
Right.
hate the feeling. Some people it makes anxious. Some people immediately puts to sleep. Some people it doesn't work for. But a lot of people are finding that it really helps. And, so the outcomes are why people are seeking out cannabis. They really want better outcomes. If people were really happy with the outcomes they were getting from their opiates, their nonsteroidals, their benzodiazepines, their Ambien, they wouldn't be seeking out cannabis. So I think people are voting with their feet. And I think the fact that so many people are embracing cannabis, especially senior people, are because the outcomes haven't been that good with traditional pharmaceuticals.
Yeah. Well, and I also think that it's opening another conversation too. Like when I used to teach my classes, I'd always tell people, even though we create our own endogenous cannabinoids, we don't all tolerate phytocannabinoids like cannabis. And guess what? That's okay. Because a lot of times it's very human to think that if something doesn't work well for you, you've had a bad reaction, it's altogether bad and nobody should be using it. But I always, tell people there are other classes of plants that you could, work with, like an herbalist or somebody else, like, like if you're having problems with mood or things like that, you could look at adaptogens. And that cannabis is just the beginning conversation of a whole world of plants that they could be taking advantage of with the help of a professional, and also letting their general practitioner and specialists know what they're using. Because I think one of the biggest conversations that we should be having is that herbs are drugs. I mean, they have drug interactions, and though yes.
Like digitalis
Yes.
is from Foxglove. I mean, tons of them.
Yeah.
So there's a big overlap. I never understood why people are in one camp or another. I know there's a
Right.
whole history there and a lot of it's financial, but it's like all these different branches, like the naturopath, the Western medicine, they all have things to contribute. I mean, it's up to each person what they're going to conclude at the end of the day. But I just don't understand why these different things are so antagonistic with each other.
No, because really, I think that I've always been a big fan of integrative medicine. I mean, there are all different things. Like coming from a family of health practitioners, I've never been anti, modern medicine. But I've also known that there were alternative therapies that in some ways, in certain cases, have been more helpful than some of the stuff that has been from, like, I don't know, I guess you'd call it allopathic medicine. So
Yeah, no, and we're evolving. Allopathic medicine is evolving. I think
yeah.
lifestyle medicine um, is a whole field of medicine now, and more and more people understand that food is medicine,
Mhm.
and there's a huge emphasis on nutrition. And Western medicine is much more interested in mindfulness and meditation. They understand how much can be cured with that. So I think Western medicine is like slowly opening to some of these things.
Yeah.
But again, it's going to take time, and then and also like people are allowed to respectfully disagree, right?
Right.
You can
100%.
respectfully disagree with someone, but still like they're entitled to their opinion.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you and I have had conversations about some things where we haven't always been in agreement, but it's like, I'm always like, well, that's really interesting that you've come, where you've come to your conclusion around that. I respect that. Like I understand why, because I think the first time that we talked, I totally ribbed you about the fact that you didn't think you were like, people shouldn't have their medicine tasting good. And I was like, what do you mean, Peter? And you're like, oh, I get beat up about that all the time. Like, and it's just kind of like, but I got it. Like when you explained it to me, I'm like, well, I see where you're coming from with that. And I think having like that discourse about and understanding the different lenses that are involved in keeping people safe and informed, they're so essential.
And, all these issues are nuanced. They're complicated, right? I mean, if people have the right, who's to say people don't have the right to make chocolate with cannabis in it, right? Of course they do. But it's just very unfortunate that you get these pediatric hospital admissions for people leaving their chocolate around. Now, if everybody were a completely responsible person, then we wouldn't have any problems. But I don't know if you've ever dealt with people before, but not all of them are completely responsible. So
wait, that's where we get that saying, and that's why we can't have nice things.
Well, it makes it really difficult. So it's a different vantage point,
Totally.
As a doctor, you see the train wrecks and they're really unfortunate. And it's hard not to feel like this could have been prevented.
Yeah, no, 100%. You and I spend a lot of time talking about cannabis, but if somebody asked you the single most important thing that they could do to age well, would cannabis even make the top 5?
No, it would be get your vaccines. It's crazy how we're becoming anti-vaccine in this country.
Yeah.
We're losing our measles-free status as a country. It's like the most shameful thing. Before vaccines, people lived till about 30 or 40. And after we started vaccinating people lived till like 70, 80. It's like doubled our lifespan. So vaccines, getting adequate sleep is really critical. Now, cannabis can be a component of that, of course.
Totally.
But getting adequate sleep, nutrition is huge, and exercise is huge. And I would just say, maybe this is because I've been a primary care doctor for 25 years, but I really think that people who have a primary care doctor, who like them, who get along with them, a primary care doctor who's curious, who listens to them, I think they tend to do really well because you have to control your blood pressure, your cholesterol. You have to get your pap smear, your mammogram, your colonoscopy. So I think preventive medicine would be the 5th. So I'd say vaccines, preventive medicine, sleep, exercise, and nutrition are my top 5.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And your relationship with your GP is one of the most important relationships you could have. I mean, I know for me, like when I was in my 30s, I was getting sick all the time and no one knew it was wrong. And that was before I was diagnosed with cancer. And it turned out that I had Hashimoto's, but I wasn't getting the right tests. But I had a great GP that after my mother got diagnosed, I was just like, hey, can we just try this medication, give it 6 weeks and see what happens since it won't harm me? And he was very, very thoughtful about it. And he was like, yeah, let's try it. Because I almost lost my job over it. Like I thought I was going crazy. But to have a general practitioner that would actually like do some experimentation with me instead of just stonewalling me and being like, well, Sarah, all of the tests that we've had have shown it's been inconclusive what's going on, except that you have an antibody titer of 100. That's all we know. And so, deal with it.
Well, I think the best doctors are like humble.
Yeah.
They listen and they're curious. And it sounds like that doctor had all those qualities. So you're lucky. That's a great primary care doctor.
It is. Well, yeah, totally. And I think that, it's I can't understate like the importance of people being proactive and advocating for themselves. Even when you're sick and you don't feel like doing it, it's essential because that's how you get out of it. It's part of the partnership with your medical professional, I think.
Right. And absolutely. I mean, that's a whole nother conversation. It's great. You have to advocate for yourself. Our medical system's completely broken. The hospitals are becoming corporations. The doctors are feeling more and more like little cogs in this big corporate machine. The insurance companies are just trying to pay for nothing so that nobody can get better. So it's important to advocate for yourself, but it's also important to realize sometimes that your doctor's kind of caught in the middle.
Yeah.
And that he or she might be doing the best that they can. And they're sort of beaten down too. So it's really frustrating to me when like I prescribe Wegovy for a patient. They want Wegovy. They need to lose weight. I want them to lose weight. The insurance company says no, and then they get mad at me. It's just like, what do you mean? Like, I prescribed it. I fought with the insurance company. So you have to advocate for yourself, but you also have to sort of understand where the dysfunction is in the system to effectively advocate. Because if you just shoot the messenger, it doesn't accomplish anything except make the messenger even more burnt out than they were at the beginning of the day.
Are you looking for a lasting, meaningful way to connect with your audience and highlight your brand? Well, listen up, because Planted with Sara Payan is taking on new sponsors. Here's a powerful stat. 20% of listeners are more likely to support brands they hear about on a trusted podcast. And 60% actually look up that product after hearing about it. That's the power of podcasting. Planted with Sara Payan has a unique draw. With remarkable guests, we attract and engage audience that spans all sides of the cannabis spectrum. Picture your message reaching these listeners time and again. Podcast ads are evergreen, meaning your brand stays relevant as new audiences discover and binge past episodes. It's a long-term investment that keeps on giving. If you're looking for a targeted, passionate audience with lasting impact, the right listeners are here waiting to meet your brand. Visit plantedwithsara.com to get a copy of our sponsorship deck today.
That's true. I mean, and that goes to policy too. I mean, when we got into legalization here and people were mad at dispensaries or cannabis companies for things being either not available or expensive or highly taxed, I was kind of like, well, let's step back and let me teach you how the cake is baked, and you need to get active. There are people who depend on your votes for their jobs that should be listening to you. So write them letters, give them a call. You know, it's very important that we understand, you know, how the chain of how things come to be. And I think a lot of people, especially in this day and age, we just want immediate relief without having to figure out how anything is built. And that's just never going to work.
Yeah, no,
So one thing that I appreciated about the book was that it didn't just discuss whether people use cannabis. It also considers how they use it. Because you talk about modes of use. And that brings me to a conversation that I've been having with patients and consumers over the years about inhaling cannabis. And we talked about this a little bit earlier in our discussion here, but recently PAX released some new research that was comparing dry herb vaporization to smoking joints. And I wanted to know what your reaction was when you saw the study.
Well, first of all, I've always thought that using a dry herb vaporizer was safer than smoking. It just makes sense. You don't heat it up as high, you don't incinerate it, and it just seems impossible that with a dry herb vaporizer you would create as many toxic combustion products as you would with smoking it. Furthermore, anybody who's tried a dry herb vaporizer, it's much less irritating to your lungs. So I've often recommended to patients, if you're going to inhale cannabis, say someone needs to inhale it, they have a migraine, nothing else works. You know, a dry herb vaporizer, I've always said, I believe is safer than smoking. Now, there just hasn't been much hardcore data to that extent. So I was happy that PAX came out with that paper, and they have a paper showing that there were fewer dangerous combustion products resulting from dry herb vaporizing than there were from smoking. So I was really happy with the study, and it actually confirmed what I believe to be the case. Though I do need to say that in academic research, like if there's any conflict of interest, that sort of discredits the study. So I would say the PAX study, obviously there's a conflict of interest there. Not that anybody did anything wrong. It's just intrinsic in the fact that they work for PAX and they did a study. So I would love to see those results validated and replicated by some like completely unaffiliated academics that have no, dog in the hunt. And I think that would make the results a lot stronger. But I was happy to see that study, and it really does align with what I, in my intuitive believe to be true. Yeah,
I was really excited to see that too, because when I was going through cancer, that was one of the things that I was really cognizant of. I was like, well, if I've got cancer, maybe it's not a good idea to be smoking joints. So the first thing I did was I actually bought myself a dry herb vape. And and it's amazing how many people don't know that they exist or understand how they work. No, not at all. Yeah.
I was an expert witness when we when we had the Valley lung epidemic, right? And people were using these vapes and getting this, lethal lung injury. It was from illegal vapes. It wasn't from legal vapes. But in Massachusetts, they banned all vaping. And I couldn't believe it. They banned the dryer vaporizers and the vape sticks, which was ridiculous for two reasons. One, it was the illegal vapes that were making people sick. So if you ban the legal vapes, you're going to make people buy the illegal ones and make them sicker. But they banned the dryer vaporizers because the Charlie Baker used to be the governor of Massachusetts, didn't know that there was a vape stick or a dryer vaporizer. So they banned both. So I was the expert witness in a lawsuit, and we actually overturned the ban on vaping for those two reasons. One, it's so stupid to ban the legal product when it's the illegal product that's making people sick. And second of all, they had no idea that there was a difference between using a vape stick and a dryer vaporizer. And why on earth would you make a dryer vaporizer illegal? It had nothing to do with the Valley lung crisis. So not even the highest reaches of our Massachusetts government, and Massachusetts has always been a pretty progressive state about cannabis, had any idea that there was such a thing as dryer vaporizers. So I agree with you. It just astounds me that people don't know about them.
Yeah, it's something that is continuous. I mean, with policy, it's amazing how much policy is made more with where they don't do their due diligence on the information, or even when something is passed. Like, I have friends in the UK that are doing a lot of work with patients, and one of the things that they're doing is actually teaching the police, because you'll get in trouble if you don't have your card with you and you have cannabis, but smoking cannabis is not legal, but vaporizing it is. So I have friends that take the dryer vaporizers and actually have done lectures for police departments to show them these are actually legal devices that patients are using to get relief, and you should become familiar with them. But I also think that it helps them too, because I mean, they're human beings. They're going to go through stuff. Like, they should have access to all the ways of using cannabis that are the least harmful. And, especially when you're looking at, dryer vapes and the way you can control temperature to be able to take advantage of terpenes and things like that. I mean, but let me back it up a little bit. So for listeners that may not be familiar, can you explain the difference between smoking flower and vaporizing flower?
Sure. When you smoke flower, you incinerate it. You put it into a pipe, you put it into a joint, a bong, whatever. You set it on fire. You heat it up to, say, 1100 degrees, and you just incinerate it. It's like wood burning in a fireplace, and it produces medicinal benefits. It produces, with cannabis, a lot of very pleasurable recreational benefits, but it also produces smoke, which contains harmful combustion products like tar, carbon monoxide, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. When you vaporize it using a dry herb vaporizer, you're still inhaling a product of plant cannabis. But what you do is you grind it up and put it in a vaporizer, which heats it. It doesn't burn it at 1100 degrees. It heats it up to, say, 400 degrees. And it runs the hot air through the cannabis and creates the finely ground up cannabis and creates this vapor, which hopefully has fewer combustion products and is less dangerous for your lungs. When people get into the habit of it, they really, really enjoy it because it tastes better, it's less irritating to the lungs, and it's more economical. You don't lose half the smoke to side smoke. If you buy an ounce of marijuana and you're a medical patient, you get twice as much out of it, roughly, if you use a dryer vaporizer, because you're not just like losing all the smoke everywhere. But as you said, number one, people don't know about dryer vaporizers. They think vaping is just using a vape pen, and we don't know how safe or unsafe using a vape pen is. I tend to be a little bit skeptical about how safe they are, but we just don't know. But you don't have to smoke it. Again, as we talked about earlier, we really recommend people use tinctures or edibles. But I think if you need to inhale it, a dryer vaporizer seems like it would likely be a safer alternative. And, someone's dying of cancer, let them smoke it, right? I mean, just let them be comfortable. But if someone, is going to make a full recovery, but they still need to inhale something for their chemotherapy-induced nausea and vomiting. I mean, when you're in chemotherapy, the nausea comes in on really quickly and you start throwing up. And you can't exactly take an edible and wait for an hour for it to kick in. I mean, I think inhaling is much, much more effective. Another example might be a migraine. When you get a migraine, that's why pills don't work that well, because it doesn't just affect your head, it affects your gut, and you don't absorb medications. I think if you take a gummy when you're having a migraine, A, you'll be suffering for a long time, and the migraine will be getting worse over the hour it takes for the gummy to kick in. But B, you're probably not going to absorb that much of it. And I think maybe inhaling for a migraine makes more sense. That's why a lot of the migraine medications are like nasal sprays or injections, because you don't absorb pills that well. So if there are circumstances when people could be inhaling cannabis, I do think, even though, again, it hasn't been definitively proved, that a dry herb vaporizer is going to turn out to be safer than just smoking it.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. I mean, because I think all the modes of use are very important depending on, like you said, the situation. I mean, if somebody's having a really bad anxiety attack and they need something that's high in CBG or CBD to help get them back into their body, maybe taking a quick inhale of something would be helpful with, on the back end, maybe taking something that has a longer window of relief, like an edible. But you don't want to be suffering for a long time. And I'm very excited that the study found significantly lower levels of harmful combustion byproducts when cannabis was vaporized rather than burned. I know people enjoy combustion and the effects that come from it, but I think if they were, from a harm reduction perspective, if they would look at inhalation through dry herb vaporization, they'd be really surprised at how they feel. And like you said, I hope that this study actually inspires more researchers to dig into this so that we can have a paper that, it's a great paper, but like you said, we need it to come from a third-party source to really, communicate what's going on, and people won't think that, because it's coming from a company that there may be, something else to it. The researchers who did it were really thoughtful about it. But like you said, the institutionalization of the knowledge is a very important thing. But I'm so glad that it's out there and it's starting conversations. And then maybe more people will consider a safer way of inhaling cannabis if they inhale at all.
Right. And this is exactly what we need to be studying.
Mm-hmm.
Is it safe? Not just does it have fewer combustion products, but also do people do well on it? Right. I mean, we have to do clinical studies in addition to just like chemical studies. But yeah, there's exactly what we need to be studying. I'm completely with you.
Yeah.
Looking forward to the studies coming up.
Well, and you spent years advocating for evidence-based cannabis medicine. Yet many healthcare providers who would never recommend smoking still don't discuss dry herb vaporization. Why is that? Do you think it goes back to what we were talking about, that many people just don't know that it exists, or?
Well, one, doctors don't know much about cannabis in general.
Mm-hmm.
Two, doctors, if we were just talking, so many people don't know the difference. Like the whole administration of Governor Baker in Massachusetts didn't know the difference. How would a doctor possibly know the difference? So we just need to do a lot of education. Doctors need to learn more about the benefits of tinctures and of edibles, and like what the risks are, what the benefits are, what the timeline is, how long the relief is. We just have a lot of education, but there isn't definitive evidence yet that dry herb vaporizer is safer, number one. And number two, again, how would doctors even know about a dry herb vaporizer? I think people in cannabis culture know about it. I definitely know some stoner doctors that would certainly know about dry herb vaporizers. But
yeah.
And I think a lot of doctors use cannabis, but they just do it on the down low because the medical board gets so uptight about it, which is a completely ridiculous double standard, because cannabis is safer than alcohol, like by every single metric. But anyways, I think a lot of doctors do use cannabis for the stress and the burnout and the insomnia and all the things that come with being a doctor these days. But I just don't think that your average quote unquote doctor knows that much about cannabis. And then something about a dry herb vaporizer versus smoking, that's sort of a nuanced thing. And if they don't know the basics, it's hard to expect them to know like the nuances.
Right. Oh, now, if you were talking to a patient through a harm reduction lens and you were making the recommendation for somebody who likes to smoke, to try a dryer vape, and they were like, I've smoked joints for 30 years and I'm fine. How do you respond to something like that?
At the end of the day, it's your body.
Yeah.
That's what I say a lot in my primary care practice. I recommend a million things. Then I say, I'm like a buffet. I'm going to make a million suggestions, and you just decide what you want to do and what you don't want to do. Nobody does everything that I suggest, right? Except for like the most extreme health nuts. But I do try to make the point that, like, medical cannabis helps your chronic pain.
Mm-hmm.
You are going to be using cannabis probably for the rest of your life. I'm just fictional patient. You're 35 years old, right? You have fibromyalgia. Cannabis is the only thing that works. Now, could definitely tell you that it's not good for your lungs if you smoke it. A puff a week at a party, no problem at all. But if you're going to smoke it 4 times a day for the next 40 or 50 years, that is going to harm your lungs. And I just try to get them to look at the big picture of, like, yes, here's a medicine. Yes, it works for me. People at the end of the day know that smoking isn't good for them. I mean, no one really tries to argue that, yes, smoking is just as healthy as an edible. People know that it isn't. And I just try to get them to see that, like, let's be happy that you found this medicine that works for you. Let's be grateful that it's legal, at least in Massachusetts, and that you have access to it. Let's be, happy that we can have this great conversation about it and this connection. And you don't have some doctor that's just calling it the satanic weed and telling you not to do it.
Yeah.
So here you have a doctor that's, like, not anti-cannabis by any means, that's telling you it's not safe to smoke. People tend to listen more if they know that you're on their side. And I'm not trying to dissuade them from using cannabis. I'm just saying this is an unhealthy way to do it. And you can get through to a lot of people. Other people you'll never get through to. But again, that's part of being a primary care doctor. It's like, you help some people, you get totally ignored by others, and you just do your best, right?
Yeah, no, totally. As an educator, I'd always try to give people just ways of doing it safer if they're going to do it at all. It's like, well, if you like a bong, remember hygiene, clean your water, like clean your bong. If you're going to smoke, maybe consider, if you like joints, the fact that you're smoking other things than cannabis, maybe use a bowl or a bong if you keep it clean, or a dryer vape. But, like, just try to, whatever you do, try to do it in the safest, cleanest way possible, because it's up to you. You're an adult. And I do believe that when you have those open conversations with people, then they are able to be open to more options and trying things. And if they don't like it, they go back to what they know, and so be it. But at least they tried something different.
Right. And it's all about harm reduction, right? Nothing is zero harm. We're trying to reduce the harm. So I'll say to people, I'll use the analogy of, like, in the hospital, we'll use, like, someone's in severe pain. We use, like, long-acting morphine to take the edge off. And then if they have a spike of pain, we use immediate relief morphine to address the spike. And I'm like, why don't we use an edible to take the edge off? And then if you have a flare of the pain that the edible isn't covering, then you take a puff. And then a lot of times people will agree to that, and they do really well. And then they'll end up taking like 2, 3, 4 puffs a day rather than smoking all day. And so they're still smoking, but they're smoking much less. They're doing better, and we've accomplished harm reduction. It's not like black or white thinking. It's like not like all smoking or no smoking. But if you get them to smoke less and take the edge off with an edible, they do a lot better. So it's all about harm reduction at the end.
Yeah, and it's all about baby steps with people too, because I think most people, if you tell them not to do something and they like it, it makes them want to do it even more, whether they realize it or not. I know that I can be like that sometimes.
Absolutely. No, I don't beat people over the head. It's all a collaboration between doctor and patient.
Yeah.
Like, and if they get that you're on their side and and people want your honest opinion. Like, I'm going to give people my honest opinion. So.
But after everything that you've learned from your patients, your research, and writing this book, what do you hope readers are still thinking about after they finish the last page?
Need to think about educating other people, because not everybody's going to read my book, and there's still so much nonsense and just like conflicting information. So I think people need to think about educating other people about their experiences, good or bad experiences, or how they used it, or what worked, what didn't work. I just think people need to have open and honest discussions. And I think people also need to think about the fact that, sadly, medical marijuana is only legal in 40 states. There are still 10 states where it's not legal. And like, people in Idaho still get cancer.
Mm-hmm.
People in Idaho still get chemotherapy. They need the relief of cannabinoids. It's crazy that they can face either getting arrested or not having relief during their chemotherapy. So I think people really do need to think about the social context, not to mention the 20 million people, mostly with black or brown skin, that we arrested for nonviolent cannabis possession over the last 50 years. I mean, that's just horrible. And we need to, like, you know, expunge records and all that stuff. But I really think people need to be grateful if they have access to cannabis, but also be cognizant of the fact that a lot of people don't. And then the final thing is, cannabis can't just be another medication for the well-to-do. The same is for psychedelics. I got a patient off Percocet and off Valium, and they were doing really, really well on cannabis. But I work in an inner city clinic. People are really, really poor. And they said, with Mass Health, my Percocet was $1 and my Valium was $1, but the medical cannabis cost me $100 a month. So I had to go back to the Percocet and the Valium, even though I was much more awake and I felt better on the cannabis, and they were doing better. So I just think we need to come up with a framework so that people of all income brackets can have access to it. The same with psychedelics, right? It started to become this like wonder treatment for the rich. But the fact is, veterans, seniors, a lot of them are on fixed incomes. And because the insurance companies aren't paying for cannabis, it can be really, really difficult to afford. So I think people need to be grateful that it's helping them, but also think about the people that have been harmed by the war on drugs, the people that are suffering in places where cannabis still isn't legal yet, and the fact that people are having trouble affording it on fixed incomes.
Yeah, and even in the states where it's available, like in California, there are wide swaths of the state where people don't have access to cannabis because their counties have decided to not allow the sale of it. So it's not as open and as free as one would think. In California, we have compassion programs. We've had to work really hard to get those allowed during the time of legalization. It was a huge, rich part of our history because, you know, it was the Compassionate Use Act. Like it's incredibly expensive to be critically and chronically ill, whether you're low income or like, I mean, I was in middle management when I went through cancer, and my cannabis was not cheap, you know, but it was the thing that gave me the relief, and I was able to forego using other harmful pharmaceuticals that would have had side effects with colon cancer. So we need to have more talks about, well, but I mean, that's a general thing, like healthcare and everything. We need to make accessible. It is.
That'll be conversation.
Yeah, no, I'm down. You were talking about the book being, good for seniors, good for doctors, but how about caregivers? Is it a good book for caregivers?
Oh, absolutely. A lot of people are sick of seeing their relatives, their friends, their parents suffer. And they know more and more, because they hear from everybody that cannabis is helping alleviate so many of these symptoms. But a lot of them don't have practical knowledge. Like, if you've been using cannabis your whole life, you know how to get someone started on cannabis. But a lot of people are just new to it. And I think caregivers, they can make it so much more comfortable and safe. That's part of why I wrote the book. They just need to know how to advise their patient. Your mom's 90. She can't sleep. Why not give her CBD with a little bit of THC? But how do you do that if you don't know how to do that? I think my book will really help caregivers as well, because I tried to write it in a really practical, hands-on, this is how you get someone started. This is how you can work the dose up really quickly. This is what happens when you go into a dispensary. This is what's required to purchase it. I tried to make it really granular and practical. And I think hopefully it'll help caregivers make it safer and make it less stressful for the caregivers.
I love that. Where can people find the book and keep up with your work?
Oh, absolutely. Well, they can find the book definitely on, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all the online bookstores have it. It's in most bookstores, definitely online. And if people want to reach me, my email is just petergrinspoon.com. And there's a contact me button, and I'm always happy to answer questions.
Awesome. And I have a final question for you. When you think about the next 20 years of your own life, what does aging well look like for you?
For me, I'm going to be as healthy as I can. I'm going to connect with as many people I love as I can. I'm going to just enjoy every day and enjoy spending time with the people I love. And I'm going to do what I like to do best, which is writing. And I'm starting to write fiction, and I'm really enjoying it. So
That's awesome. Peter, thanks so much for joining me. I always have so much fun with you, and I look forward to the next time we get to geek out together.
Well, I look forward to it too. And thank you for having me on. Really nice to see you.
Really good to see you too, my friend. And everyone, remember, if you like listening, please give us a review, share it with a friend, let us know what your favorite episodes are. And if you'd like to stay in touch over social media, we are Planted with Sara Pion on Facebook and Planted with Sara on Instagram and Twitter. You can also go to our website, www.plantedwithsara.com, or listen to us on our parent network, Radio Misfits Network, where there are other great podcasts, like one of my favorites, the Winemakers Podcast. So check it out. You can listen to Planted wherever you listen to your favorite podcast, whether that's Pandora, Spotify, Amazon, Google, Apple, Stitcher. Tune in. We are there. So join us. And until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and remember, it's a wild world out there. Be good to one another. Until next time, take care.